All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Word is Bond podcast hosted by the Bond Educational Group. Every Friday at noon for the past couple of months, we have been interviewing leaders in education and business about how equity is showing up in their industries. So I am Stephanie Bradley, the project lead for the Bond Educational Group and the Equity Summit, and the moderator for today's discussion. So before I introduce you to our guests, I want to remind our viewers that the Equity Summit is quickly approaching from February 8th through 10th, 2022. The event will still be 100% virtual, so be sure to go online and purchase your tickets at www.theequitysummit.com. So our theme this year is Rising Together, and we are even more excited about our speaker lineup for this year. So for more information, again, visit our website, theequitysummit.com. So today we have Dr. Angela Glymph Austin, who is the Vice President of Programs and Strategic Learning at the Peer Health Exchange. Do you go by Dr. Angela, Dr. Glymph Austin? What do you prefer?
We can do Angela. That's all good today.
Okay, awesome. So if you can give us an introduction of yourself and your organization and your role at your current job.
Absolutely. So I work for Peer Health Exchange. It's a nonprofit organization that is based in Oakland, California. And what we do, we are a health equity organization. So we are building healthier communities for young people with young people. Our mission is that we're going to advance health equity and health outcomes for young people, specifically young people living in underserved communities. And we do that by creating spaces for young people and their peers to exchange health knowledge and resources so they can make healthy decisions. And so my role, actually, I just got a promotion. So I need to say my new role is an expanded leadership role. So I will be the head of organizational learning and strategy. And really principally my job is to make sure that we are successful in the strategic plan that's all about centering young people and working together with young people to build those healthier communities and just making sure that strategically we are on par to do that, and then to learn along the way. So that's really what the organizational learning part about that is, really to define, what success will look like in this plan, and to sort of monitor, our progress towards that success, and really recommend, make pivots when we need to make pivots, seek opportunities when we need to seek opportunities. And so that's principally what I'm in charge of. But I'm really excited about this work because I get to work with young people in doing this work. And so really I'm excited to talk about, sort of our approach at Peer Health Exchange in really centering young people who are often removed from conversations about what health education should look like for them, and really amplify their voices in this work.
Oh, I love it. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Cheers to you. I wish I would have known. I would have brought my wine out. We could have cheered. Okay, so I love what you mentioned about health equity specifically. So my question is kind of twofold. What does health equity mean for those that don't know? And then also, what does equity in general mean to you?
Yeah, so I'll start with the equity first in general, because I think it's really important, for folks who are newer in this work. It's simply, for me, equity is about, evening the playing field. So you have to recognize and accept that, everyone is not starting at the same level. People have different levels of access to opportunities and to resources. And so really equity is about taking that assessment, that honest assessment of the disparities, and really doing the work to make sure that the playing field is even. And so in my work, I'm specifically dealing with health equity. It's the same thing, that with young people, and especially young people in underserved communities, there are huge disparities in terms of their access to even health education. I mean, we're working primarily in high schools, in urban centers, where health education isn't even offered, right? So it's not offered. So it doesn't even exist for some of those young people. So really to expect them to do the things, to have the knowledge, the access, the resources, to make healthy decisions and to live healthy lives is really unreasonable, really,
Yeah.
and so much that they don't have. So my work is really about really addressing those inequities as it pertains to health. But to be quite honest, I mean, the health inequities that we're sort of combating together with young people are the same sort of systemic
Mhm.
inequities that show up in education, and that just shows up in a number of areas. So it really is sort of the same systems are operating that really make it hard for young people to have healthy lives, but they're the same inequities that show up in their ability to get the education more generally and more broadly than they need. So the health equity piece of it is just about evening the playing field so that folks have the same opportunities to
Mhm.
healthy outcomes.
Yeah.
So that's really what it's about.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And then when you say health, I think a lot of people generalize that. You can be talking about medical health, like getting your annual physical exam, or you could
Right.
be talking about mental health, which we know there's a strong stigma, especially in communities of color. So
Right.
what are you seeing between those two? Where is the emphasis for Pure Health Exchange? Is it in both areas? Is it one or the other? Or is there a strong focus in one of those two areas?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question. So we primarily focus on mental health, we focus on sexual health, and we focus on substance use, substance abuse,
Hmm.
because those are the three areas where we know, especially the communities that we are serving and working in partnership with. Those are sort of the three areas of health where we see the greatest disparities, but also those are the three areas of health that we know that those disparities also lead into other disparities in other aspects of these young people's lives.
Hmm.
So barriers to education, being able to get a job, being able to to further or continue their education. So those are why those are the areas. But of course, I think we take a skills-based approach. So what I didn't say is our approach is to reach young people where they are. Most of our young people are in schools. So we do
Hmm.
have a school-based approach, like we develop a health curriculum really for
Oh,
schools
wow.
that don't currently have any health education or very limited health education, because we know in those schools, resources are limited and schools have to prioritize where those dollars go. And
Mhm.
unfortunately,
Mhm.
health education just are at the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
So again, another systemic problem that
Mhm.
is affecting these young people's health. Um, and so we intervene that way, but also recognizing that there are lots of young people who are not in schools, unfortunately, especially in the communities
Mhm.
that need this resource. And so we had to find a way, and really the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, kind of forced us because kids weren't in school. And
Yeah.
therefore
Yeah.
we were not reaching anyone with our current model. So we had to figure out, all right, so if kids are not in school, how then do we go about reaching them? And so we have developed digital products and really have leaned on social media, because those are the places where young people are, whether they are in school or not. And so really had to work with young people and co-develop these products with young people to get them the information and the resources that they needed the most, especially during the pandemic. But again, we knew before the pandemic, like these are things that young people, especially in underserved communities, needed.
Mhm.
Um, it's just the pandemic just shed a light on just how important it was for us to show up for those young people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I kind of liken it to a corporate environment that had to shift to being completely virtual, to maybe their employees that were going into the office every day, right? You're forced into a model that just didn't exist previously. And then you pivot and you get as agile as possible and you meet folks where they are. And now you see that a bunch of workplaces are declaring, okay, well, we're never going to have to be 100% in the office. We're now fully hybrid work environment. So those are the things. And it's almost like another form of equity. Now especially working parents, have gotten used to being able to drop off and pick up their kids. And who wants to not do that anymore if you already know that it's been functioning well for the past, I don't even know how long we've been in the pandemic now, like 2 years, year and a half, I don't even know, 5 years, who knows? But yes, I really liken it to something that has been happening in corporate as well. So that's wonderful. So let me pivot to the role that equity plays. I think you already covered how it plays in your current job, but if you have more examples of that, feel free to share. But then also in your day-to-day interactions with others. So that can kind of lead into why you got into this work, what influences you in this work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So so we are a health equity. I mean, we do health equity work. So that is our job. Like that is what the organization is about. But I think key into that, we realized that in order for us to really do this work meaningfully and effectively, we had to also think about equity as a core value. Like it just had to be inherent in our organization's DNA. And so we really sort of took an audit of like, okay, so let's think about like our organizational practices. Like, are we really upholding equity in the way that we demand the world to uphold equity, health equity for young people? Wow. And to be honest, after we took that audit, it was like, we could do better.
Yeah.
And it really is, it really took, myself and my other colleagues in leadership to think about things as a parent, as like, how are decisions being made, right? Like, how do we make decisions? And let's do an audit of like our decision-making processes. Who typically is at the table? Typically gives the input? Who's typically affected by the decisions that we're being made? And what sort of is like the differential effects of said decisions? Who's usually affected more negatively than others, right? So like those are some of the things that we really had to have a reckoning with and really think about, okay, so there's disparity, right? And be honest about it. And so then we had to really think about like, okay, so how are we going to make sure that we're upholding this core value of equity in what we do? The first thing that we noticed, in addition to sort of like how we function organizationally, but like I said, our mission is building healthier communities with people. But guess what? We don't have young people at the table. So that's a big problem. How do you do that work and you don't have young people in your organization who's actually partnering with you? And so that was another big sort of aha moment for us in realizing like, yeah, we have to take inventory of like, who's at the table when we're doing this work? Who are we being guided by? Who are we being influenced by? Who needs to be at the table? And so, we made conscious decisions of, creating youth advisory boards for the first time last year and really having those young people really advise us. And we were accountable to hearing, to listening, to playing back what we heard, and basically saying back to them, this is what we're planning to do, this is what we're not going to do, and why. And so it really was sort of shifting the power. And so that's another thing, like, who typically has power in your organization? Who's able to relinquish power? Like, how can you leverage your power in advancing the voices of those who are typically unheard in your organization? So for me in my day-to-day, it is about that. It's like being very transparent. I mean, I do have a leadership role. I do get to make decisions, but one of the things that I committed to is like being transparent about how am I making decisions? Whose input am I getting? How am I weighing certain things? Who's at the table? So for me, my definition of equity is inclusion. They have to go hand in hand, right? Like you can't do equity work. You can't say, well, I'm doing health equity work for young people, and you don't have their voices to tell you what they need, or what's the best way of going about, providing those opportunities and those access and resources to them. And so I work with young people a lot. Like, I've done podcasts with young people.
Oh,
I
that's
wrote
great.
a book chapter with young, like I wrote a book about like, how do you share power with young people? And I was like, I got invited to do it. And I was like, well, I can't write this chapter without a young person that I
Yeah.
write with. Like, they have to be an author. And it was really, really interesting, because this particular, I mean, it's in an edited book, and they were like, we've never had young people as authors. So like it really sort of like really changed a lot, because it was like, okay, so what's the legal with this, and like how do we do this, and like and things like, we have to honor young people's time. So anytime I work with young people, they are paid for. So it's like little things like that. I think it's like your values. You really have to value equity in your organization. Like, it has to be a part of how you just work.
Yeah.
And you have to be honest. You have to get the feedback. They're experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have that expertise in-house, you have to then seek that if you want to, and you have to commit to the behavior changes that relates to equity. And it's a day by day. Everyone is accountable for it. And then you have to understand, me being in a leadership position, I do hold some power. And so when am I going to shift power when I need to? And sometimes I have to, have to give my power to that young person. I have to listen. And I think one clear example of that is, when I mentioned, we would go into classrooms. So we would train college students to go into high schools and teach those health education workshops on sexual health, mental health, substances. COVID hit. At that time, I was in charge of program, and I had to make the decision, like, we can't do this. Like, we just stopped mid-program. We stopped because it just wasn't safe for anybody to continue in that way. But I also knew stopping a health education program in communities that are being disproportionately affected by this pandemic for all of the reasons that we're trying to combat, it was just so hard to do that. And I knew that we have to find a way to continue to reach out to these young people. One, because they said it, like they told us, like, I know y'all can't come into our schools, but we need you. So that enough for me was like, okay. Right. But I knew that we had to create different things. And so, I just had to address my own adultism and say, you know what? I'm not an expert at being a student in a pandemic. Why? Because I've never done that. I don't know what a young person needs, because I never had that experience. I just hadn't. And when I was in high school years ago, right? Like, we didn't have social media. We didn't have the access to the technology. So even if I had been in a pandemic when I was in high school, my experience would have been different, because just the world was different and technology was different. And so I think that for me was like, I am not the expert here. These young people are the expert in what they need in this moment. And for me, that was the power shift. I was like, I am listening to everything that they say that they need. I'm listening to what they say is the best way to reach their peers. Whatever they say, we're doing. And so leading a team that is in charge of developing these tools, I basically laid that expectation. So that was my internal power to say, young people get to approve the product.
Wow.
Not me, not you, but them. They approve it. And if they say, okay, we go. If they say change it, we change it. So those are some examples of, like, especially if you're in leadership or just organizationally, if you do org culture work, that is what I think upholding equity could look like. That's just an example, but that is evening the playing field, right? Like, it is knowing when to fall back. It's knowing when to shift power. It's knowing when to dismantling maybe structures that have existed in your organization for a long time, and to say, you know what, this system is causing inequities and we have to dismantle it and build. And that's hard. I know it's not easy. So I'm not saying that it is still a work in progress, but that is what it can look like in an organization in your day to day.
That is so powerful, because when we think of equity, we often think of racial equity, which is at the forefront of everyone's mind, typically, especially lately. But there's also ageism. There's things like that where you automatically think, if you see someone like me walk into a room, you may think that I'm not all the way up there. You're expecting maybe like an older white man or something like that, right? So we have to come to terms with, these young people are the future leaders. So the sooner that we relinquish our own power, the sooner that the system will change, because they are in charge of the system once they get to that point. So that is really powerful, and it's a way to really give back to these young people too, because they need someone to coach them, and we can't. As soon as a mistake is made, sometimes it's like, oh, they don't know what they're doing. They're just, they're young. They can't make a right decision. But really, we are here to coach them, and not in some, like mother, son, mother, daughter kind of way. They are our equals. They have the power. They have the decision making. If anything, especially in this situation, they have more knowledge than we do.
Exactly.
So who are we? Who are we to tell them what is better? That is really powerful. I love that. Do you think now that you have gone into this work, and especially with the pandemic that you mentioned, and we mentioned the past couple of years, racial inequity has really been at the top of folks' mind because of everything going on in the media. Do you think that the equity conversation is more important now than has ever been?
Absolutely. I think what has happened over these past 18 months is that there's a visibility that folks just cannot ignore on how inequitable our society is. And I think because of social media, right, like there are images that you just can't remove from your mind. Like they just don't go away. So I think right now what we're experiencing is just like a heightened visibility. It's shedding light on inequities that, I know myself as a person of color, as a woman doing work that, mostly is male, dominated, for example.
Right.
I've known these things have existed for a long time. But I think it's just now, like the pandemic, for example, has just really shed light on a lot of systemic oppression, the racism, just a lot of social ills that have really caused these wide variations and huge disparities. And now with COVID-19, it's like a death situation, right? And I think that is what it is. I think people just have been awakened to, what really has been going on. And when you have a society where equity is really not there and not in place, that it is a life or death situation. That's really what's been happening. So absolutely, I think it's really important. But here's the opportunity. I think we have an opportunity to learn and to change our behaviors. We have an opportunity to prevent, like, I don't know. COVID-19 hopefully will be over soon.
Yeah, right.
Right. But there could be another thing, right, that happens. And so I think we have an opportunity to say, okay, here's what we know has been problematic for a long time. Here is our opportunity to redress a lot of the things that have caused these wide variations in this pandemic, such that when something else happens, right, communities are equipped, right, with the resources, with the knowledge, right, that then will help them if another said, pandemic happens, right, it won't be a knowledge gap, right? It won't be an access or resource gap, right? It won't be racism or racial discrimination. So I think we have opportunities, and we definitely have like a prime case, like this is like a prime public health case
right.
to learn from, right? And then young people, these young people are experiencing things that many of us who are making decisions about what schooling needs to look like for them, what education needs to look like for them moving forward, what healthcare needs to look like for them, right? Like a lot of it's adults making those decisions, but not enough asking of the young people, right? What are like the top 3 things that you need from education right now? And I will tell you right now, the young people that I talk to, they're like, look, this preoccupation on learning loss, like we've lost all this learning because we were virtual. That is not the only thing that we lost in this pandemic. How about I lost family members in this pandemic and no one's addressing my mental health or my social emotional well-being?
Wow.
How about there are things I gained and no one's, it's a preoccupation on what we lost. But no one has talked about what we gained, because let's be honest, Stephanie, for a lot of communities, school is not a safe place for a lot of people. So for some of them, they're like, hey, I was really digging virtual because, hey, I didn't have to worry about getting shot walking to school or, So I think, so those are the conversations that are not being had with the folks that are most affected by the inequities. And unfortunately, I think that is a challenge of doing good equity work. Like a lot of times it's well-intentioned, but that's why for me, my definition has to have inclusion. You gotta have the folks that you are doing this work in service for, always at the table and always in positions of power to make the decisions as well.
Yeah, and I think this is a great point to close out on, because you talked about inclusion, and the way that you're doing it also encompasses belonging, because you are making that, you're not just bringing them to the table, you're making them feel like they deserve to be there. And I think that that's the piece of equity that we can all probably take a step back and really purposely try to include, because that's like saying, a white person saying like, oh, I can't be racist, I have Black friends. So you're including, but are you making them feel a sense of belonging? Are they really your friend? That those are the things that can transcend into corporate environments, into the work that you're doing. So I think that you're really bringing home the sense of belonging that comes with inclusion, especially for these young people. So I love this. And I will say the last question is, how are you striving towards creating a more equitable society? But I feel like what this whole conversation has been about. So I don't know if you have anything to add there, but I think everything you do is doing this already. But if you have any takeaways, listening, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's probably evident now to the viewers that, really my belief is that young people have a lot of power. And I just think that we don't leverage some of the leadership that they inherently have or invest enough in their leadership development. So for me, I mean, that's my purpose, that's like my life's work, is really to make space for young people to really lead. And part of that is doing my own work as an adult. Like I'm constantly working on my own adultism that I have, and really checking myself as to, wait a minute, like, why do you think young people can't figure that out? Like, why do you need to be in all spaces when young people are doing that? Like, you don't need to be in those spaces, right? Let them bring you in to that when they're ready to have, when they're ready to have me. Or if I'm facilitating spaces that are mostly adults, like I don't bring young people into those spaces. I get those spaces of adults worthy for the young people. So so that is, it's a constant work in progress. But yeah, that really is what I believe. Really working with, groups that are historically and traditionally marginalized, which young people are in a lot of respects. And just really doing my part in recognizing, my own privilege, my own power, and really making space at the table for, those communities to have voice in shaping their own communities and in shaping what, a healthy outcome looks like for them, and not me determining with my own bias, but having them determine and give and finding the way to give them the opportunities, the access, and the resources they need to do that. So that's what I do.
Awesome. Yeah, you're like, that's it. That's all that I do. Just that. Thank you so much, Angela. And we hope that you will join us I'm actually going to send you an email so you could be a speaker, because this was just everything.
Oh, wow. But here's the thing. This is with my power. Invitations also have to be extended to young people. Like, I can't speak on.
Yes, I love
I'm not
it.
expert in everything. So you want me, you gotta have a young person with
Oh,
me.
we will definitely work it out. Thank you so much, Angela.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for tuning in. As a reminder, the Equity Summit will be virtual and held on February 8th through 10th, 2022. You could buy tickets at theequitysummit.com. So purchase tickets today if you can. Angela will be there. I'm gonna go ahead and speak it into existence. But thank you again for this conversation. It was so enlightening, and thank you for the work that you do, especially for our young people.
Awesome. Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.